There. Good. Hello, my name is John Deedy, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County. Today, I am talking with Congressman Johnny Olszewski about the situation regarding the government shutdown. Hello, Congressman.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Doing well, better than unfortunately a lot of government employees who aren't getting a paycheck.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've already seen in Maryland, the Trump administration and Russ Vogt had fired 15,000 Marylanders, more than any other state in this country in terms of an assault on federal workers. And that's continued during the shutdown, where we've not only seen employees who've been furloughed, but we've seen the administration go further and now firing thousands of additional employees during the shutdown. We're seeing our workers in all of our federal agencies being used as political pawns during the shutdown, as opposed to really having leaders who show empathy and sympathy for what they're going through.
How long do you think this shutdown is going to last? Because I thought it would go about a week and cooler heads would prevail. But now, if you asked me, I'm thinking Thanksgiving, and I'm trying to be more optimistic than that.
Yeah, I would hate to put a specific timetable on it. I want us to open up the government as quickly as possible. I think we can and should do so in a bipartisan way. I think we can address the looming healthcare crisis that is out there. We're going to see families across Maryland and across America see thousands of dollars of increases on their premiums across the country if we don't act. But also, we know that there have been cuts that have been done unilaterally, and the Key Bridge funding that's so important to the Baltimore region has been threatened. So the biggest point for me, though, is that we have to be in the same room to find that consensus and to find that bipartisan path forward. Unfortunately, President Trump has been completely absent from any conversations around reopening the government. Speaker Johnson has canceled votes for weeks now. He refuses to have members of the House be in session to do our work. He's not in the room having conversations with Democratic leaders. The Senate cannot get their act together and come together and find a bipartisan solution. But we have to start with actually talking to each other to forge that compromise. And until we do that, at this point, it sort of feels indefinite that this shutdown can go on, which, as you pointed out, is really detrimental to the countless federal employees who are still working without any sort of paycheck at this point.
When thinking about this shutdown, do you think Speaker Johnson has to get a signal from President Trump? Yes, you can talk with Democrats. Do you think he can operate independently on his own? Or what do you think the situation is with him?
Well, like you, John, I taught American government and U.S. history. We're both educators, and I have to say that Speaker Johnson is failing. He is failing the American people, and he would have failed my American government class because he's not recognizing that Congress is meant to be a co-equal and separate branch of government. Unfortunately, both he and my Republican counterparts in the House, in particular, have been taking their marching orders from President Trump. And so at this point, I do think the president can uniquely tell House Republicans to come to the table. The president can come to the table to make this happen, and so we can get back to work. I don't want to lose sight, though, the fact that part of the reason I believe Speaker Johnson refuses to bring us back to session is because Adelita Grijalva was just elected. Actually, weeks ago, she was elected to be the newest member of the House of Representatives. She represents the final signature to force a vote on the Epstein discharge petition, which would force a vote on releasing the files of the House. We know that, unfortunately, Speaker Johnson and many of his colleagues are protecting child sexual predators. They're protecting pedophiles because they know that this vote would release it. Representative-elect Grijalva has been asking for it. Speaker Johnson said he would do it anytime she wants. They swore in both a member from Virginia the day after he was elected. They swore in members from Florida the day after they were elected. This is not unprecedented. And the only valid excuse I can think of is because of this Epstein.
Speaker Johnson has claimed at times that he is a man of faith. I have seen him at times when people have brought up personal matters related to President Trump that he doesn't even want to talk about because of the inappropriate possible language. How can you reconcile that type of thing with a man who doesn't want to get to the truth regarding this whole Epstein situation?
It's really hard to fathom it and put piece together. I want to applaud members of Congress on the Republican side, like Representative Massey, and several others who have courageously added their name to the discharge petition on these Epstein files, who have said that we have to release them, obviously protecting the identities and the names of these survivors. But I don't know how Speaker Johnson or anyone can claim to be a person of faith and to be a parent. As a parent myself, it is abhorrent to think about what Jeffrey Epstein and others have done. And I think the American people deserve to know who are the rich, the powerful, the politically connected people who are in those files who participated in his crimes and or his cover-up. Half of America already believes that President Trump is involved somehow in what Epstein did. That was through an Economist poll. The president we know is in the files. Pam Bondi said so. But if I'm President Trump, I would want to do everything that I could to clear my name. I would want to have all of the files released so that I could be clear that I did nothing. But it really makes you wonder, what is the cover up if all of these individuals are truly so innocent? And why is Speaker Johnson and why are most Republicans in Congress trying so hard to prevent the release of these files? It is a deeply concerning issue.
One concern I have is I was recently doing a guest spot on WBAL radio, and the issue of this whole shutdown was occurring. And my Machiavellian theory, or my conspiracy theory, better yet, is that this is being done to try to kill Obamacare. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10, John, you're absolutely right. 1, you're out of your mind. Where would you put this?
I would say probably 8, 9, or 10. I mean, Republicans have wanted to eliminate the Affordable Care Act since before its passage. We remember the infamous scene where John McCain had to come in and do the thumbs down to save the repeal of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. It is deeply popular from Americans now. It is something that has provided coverage to millions of Americans. And I think Democrats are right to raise the alarm that if we do not act, almost 20 million Americans who rely on the subsidies will see increases by thousands of dollars per year. And even those Americans who aren't lucky enough or who are lucky enough to have employer-based healthcare are going to still see their premiums go up by a significant amount. And this is after Republicans have already, in the big ugly bill, gutted Medicaid from millions of Americans. That's not happened yet. That is going to happen. In addition to gutting food support for veterans and children and our seniors. So the cruelty continues, destroying the healthcare system, and the expansions that were made possible under the Affordable Care Act are absolutely part of the agenda here. And, you know, we live in the wealthiest nation known in the history of the universe. And the idea that we can give away tax breaks to the tune of trillions of dollars to billionaires, some of the biggest tax breaks ever, and those are permanent. That was done in the big ugly bill. But we can't find a way to keep healthcare somewhat affordable for working families is really kind of unbelievable to me. But that's what we're facing as we're having these conversations.
In talking to the Republicans that you know in Congress, have any of them ever discussed, hey, here's a healthcare program we support? Is there a Republican healthcare program out there that would fix some of the problems in Obamacare that people have discussed that say, you know, it needs to be tweaked a little bit? Do Republicans have a plan?
Not that I'm aware of, and that's not to say that there aren't proposals out there. Everything I've heard has been about we want to take away the Affordable Care Act, we want to take away Obama. And I have not seen a compelling alternative to that vision. I will say to you and to the folks who listen to your podcast here that we need to be taking a hard look at healthcare. Healthcare costs are spiraling out of control. The escalations year over year are not sustainable. And so we need to be looking at ways how we sort of rein in costs of healthcare as a country. You look at what's happening in countries around the world, there are many other countries that have much better health outcomes, much better health services, lower wait times, and their cost curve is very different. It's much more flat than what we're seeing in America. So I think Republicans and Democrats are alike are right to raise the alarm that we should be looking at the cost of healthcare, but ripping away health coverage from hardworking, decent Americans across this country, while you're also gleefully giving away tax benefits to billionaires, is I don't think who we should be as a country, and it's why I think Democrats are raising this issue. On the point of funding, though, I think it's sort of, I'll just reinforce that more fundamental bright red line for me. I think the healthcare issue is really important, and I'm glad that we're raising this as part of the shutdown conversation. But for me, we've already seen Republicans go back on the handshake deal, the law that was set in place, where it was a bipartisan budget, where Democrats and Republicans came together to enact a bipartisan budget through pocket rescissions that I think are illegal, through legal rescissions that were done through the Congress. Both this president and a single party has stripped away billions of dollars from the budget. They fired hundreds of thousands of employees across this country. And the chair of the Freedom Caucus, the OMB director, Russ Vought, the president have all said we're going to continue down this road. And so when we think about the Key Bridge, when we think about institutions in Maryland in particular, it's really hard for me to justify continuing to fund the government when I've already been told, and Republicans have said, if I were a Democrat, I wouldn't believe that either. So that is like the brightest of red lines. We need to have some protections against future cuts and future firings that have just been, I think, heartless and in many cases illegal.
You think part of the problem in coming to a deal is the problem is Democrats don't trust Republicans because in the recent past they've gone back on their word. And the problem is Democrats are like saying, you tell us to come back and we'll work everything out. But Democrats, it seems like they're very focused on, well, we want to see things in writing.
That's exactly right. I don't want to just see it in writing. I want to see it in law. And it's not a Democrat saying, I don't trust Republicans. These are Republicans saying that Democrats should not trust President Trump and Republicans in Congress. Susan Collins just today said that she understands why Democrats are so concerned. Countless members of the House have said if the shoe were on the other foot, they would not agree to a budget based on what Republicans and President Trump have already done. And so that's separate and apart from even the healthcare discussion, which I think is an important one. But this relates specifically to the budget. And I think it's a really important issue that has not gotten the attention that it deserves as we have this conversation about government funding.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not worried at all, 10 being 5 alarm fire, how concerned are you about possibly losing Key Bridge funding?
I don't know that I want to put a number on that one in particular, but I will say that it is a serious enough threat when the president of the United States explicitly calls out taking funding away from the Francis Scott Key Bridge rebuild, when Secretary Sean Duffy puts forward a letter that criticizes costs, which we're still waiting to get the final cost estimates from the state from, by the way. But when those things happen, you have to take those threats seriously because the actions of this administration has always matched the rhetoric, whether it's about their disdain and wanting to really go after federal employees, disdain for and hatred for federal employees, and then firing them and making their lives difficult, whether it's canceling other green energy projects, predominantly in Democratic-led districts. We're seeing New York Times reporting today that over $23 billion of projects were canceled in Democratic-led districts when less than $700 million of those projects were in Republican-led districts. This is an administration that is happy to weaponize the federal government for political purposes. And that's not what our country is about. That doesn't speak to who we should be as a people. So I would say I take that threat very seriously. And I don't know that I would necessarily say that the funding is actively at risk, but it is certainly a concern that keeps me up at night as I serve in this role.
Last question I'll ask is this. Do you think part of the problem coming to a deal is that Republican members of Congress are in their conservative media bubble? If Fox News was to tell them tomorrow there ought to be negotiations, they'd probably go there because right now it seems like in conservative media, they're hearing the message, you're winning, you're winning. So because they're hearing this message in conservative media, you're right, they're wrong, there's no reason for them to go to the table. Do you think that's part of the problem?
I don't want to speak for my Republican colleagues, but what I can tell you is that the American people in poll after poll after poll do attribute the blame overwhelmingly to the Republicans who are in control of Congress right now. Republicans are in control of the House, they're in control of the Senate, they have the presidency, they have all the levers of power. Democrats have very little ability to influence outcomes. So the fact that they're unwilling to talk to Democrats at all, to even sit in a room with us and say, what can it take to find a bipartisan path forward? I think it is really telling. And I think it is sort of placing blame in the right places. The American public is doing that. But I want us to reopen. I want us to be at the table. The shutdown is not good for anyone. And it's my hope that whether it's President Trump or a particular news outlet, whatever it takes to change the hearts and minds of the majority of my colleagues to have us come back and do work. I mean, when Marjorie Taylor Greene and Johnny Olszewski agree on an issue about our concern about healthcare and our desire to see a bipartisan path forward to open this government, that's saying something. She and I have not agreed on much during my tenure here, but there are Republicans who are now saying that, which I think, I hope that more speak up and speak out so that we can get to the table and find our way to a deal.
That's one of those ones with Marjorie Taylor Greene. If pigs had wings, they could fly, and I see flying pigs.
That's right.
Thank you again, and good luck. I hope this shutdown ends sooner rather than later.
Me too. Thanks, John.
You're welcome.